everyone, welcome to the Coding Channel. Today is the third episode of our Python tutorial series for beginners. And in this episode, we are going to talk about how to use the if-else statements in Python. This and more when we come back. In our previous episode, we've already talked about how to get the user input by using the input function and how to use the arithmetic operators available in Python. These are some of the basic, and how to display the output by using the print function. Now, Python also supports conditional operators that we can use when it comes to decision making, because decision making is required when we want to execute a code only if a certain condition is satisfied. So the if statement is used in Python when it comes to decision making, and we will be needing the some of the conditional operators that I have listed here. So we have an equals, we have a not equals, we have less than or equal, and then the greater than, and then the greater than or equal. Okay, so let's start. Now I have here two input statements already, prompting the user to enter a number 1 and the number 2. And then we are going to determine if the inputs are equal, if they are not equal, or if it's a less than or greater than, or greater than or equal. Okay, so the first thing that we need to know is the if syntax in Python. Okay, so it's a very easy. You just have to use the if keyword, and then you just have to put a space. And then, for example, we want to compare the n1 and n2, so you just have to put there, type there n1, and then for example, we will use the double equal sign for equality. Okay, so if n1 is equal to n2, and then you just have to put a colon. So that's it. Unlike in other programming language that we normally use the parentheses here, so in Python we only we don't need to use the parentheses, but instead you just have to put a space there, and then the equality, the conditional operator, and then the colon. Okay, and then after that, the statements, okay, that you want to display, for example, or you want to execute once this condition is true. So for example, we have a print output, a print function here if we want to display the output. Okay, let's say, for example, we want to display n1. For example, if the user have entered 5 and 5, so we want to have an output that is a 5 is equal to 5. So how are we going to do that? So since a 5 is in n1, so we will use the n1 variable, and then just use a comma there, and then a string, for example, 5 is equal to, and then another comma, and then another variable, let's say n2. So that's how simple it is. If we're going to run, okay, to see the initial output, so for example, we have enter number 1, so we have 5, and then another 5, for example. Once you press the enter key, so you will see now 5 is equal to 5. Now if you have noticed that we only have we've used only one line here for the condition, and then for the output statements. So this one is allowed in Python if you only have one statement. But actually, you can also press the enter key to make it 2 lines. But take note to have an indentation here. In other programming languages, the indentation is not important. But in Python, you have to consider this one, that the indentation is a must. These are the white spaces, that we can see at the beginning of a line. So when we're going to, for example, if you want to align this one in an if condition, so you will get an error. If you want to run this one, okay, so you will see that this one is an indentation error, since because Python relies on the indentation, okay, to know which particular statement is going to be executed once the if condition is true. Okay, or for Python to know the scope of the if statement, for example. So the indentation here is required. Okay, so I will just have to put it back, just put in one line because I'm just planning to only use one statement per if condition. So okay, let's try to continue. Okay, so let me just copy this one to try other equal conditional operators. For example, we have A is not equal to B. So if we're going to use that, not equal to B, so we will be using the exclamation point and then equal sign. And then, for example, N1, we've used our variables here, N1 and N2. So uh, N1 not equal is not equal to, okay? And then let's try to first before we run. Aside from not equal, so we have the less. Okay, so we can just use less than here, and then is less than, let's say N1 is less than N2. Okay, and also if we have the less than sign, we also have less than or equal. Okay, so is less than or equal to. Okay, and then another, if we have the less than, we also have the greater than sign. So you can also use that one here. So if N1 is greater than, so we have a greater than, and then also we can use greater than or equal. So is greater than or equal to N2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so it's complete now. So let's try to run. Let's say, for example, the input is 7 and then 9. So these are the conditions that is which are true with the input 7 and 9. 7 is not equal to 9. Okay, so that is true. 7 is less than 9, and 7 is less than or equal to 9. Okay, let's try another. For example, we have 8 and a 6. So if we have a combination of 8 and 6, 8 is not equal to 6. 8 is greater than 6, and 8 is greater than or equal to 6. Okay, so that's it. Or the last one, again, if we have the enter, for example, 7 and 7. So we have 7 is equal to 7. 7 is less than or equal to 7. So this one is also true because of the equal sign. So this two, okay, either less than or the greater than. Okay, so that's how we do it. Every time we have a decision making to make, so we use the if statement. So again, if you want to have to make it 2 lines, so you can do this, but take note to put the and then, okay, because just again for Python to know um, that this statement is under this uh, if condition. So if this condition is true, so Python will execute this statement. Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. Now I just want to highlight that in Python, just like any other programming language, once if you're using an if statement, individual if here, Python, for example, will test if n1 is equal to n2. If it is true, so Python will execute this statement. So after executing this, again, Python will test another if, until the last if. Okay, it's because we've used an individual if statement here. So what about if we want to use, for example, if the condition is already true, so Python will no longer test the other remaining conditions. Okay, so let's try another example. For instance, we are tasked to write a Python program to check if the user input is a negative, a zero, or positive number. Okay, so let's start with an input statement. For example, we have a number is equal to int. We use int, that is a casting again, if we want to convert the string to integer, because by default, the text that we typed in the uh, console is string by default. We use the input function. Okay, enter a number, for example. So we will just determine if that number again is a negative, a zero, or positive. Okay, so we will use an if statement here. So for example, if number first is negative, so if number is less than a zero, so that means to say that is negative, right? So this time we will just assign to a for example, an output variable. So our output is equal to for example, a negative a string. Okay, so this time let's talk about another statement. So in Python we have an elif. You can use an elif. In other programming language, we like for example in Java we use else if, but in Python we don't have an else if, but instead we use the elif. If you have another condition, so for example, elif number is for example is equal to zero, so the output is positive. Okay, something like that. And then else, okay, so that's it. We have now else. So else number, or if you have another condition, okay, so we can actually put here as greater than zero, or if you don't want to have that condition, let's try to have another. Okay, for example, elif, let's just continue the elif. Okay, so number is greater than zero, so that means to say our output is positive. Okay, this one is not positive, this one is zero, I'm sorry. Okay, this one is supposed to be zero here, zero, and then this one is positive. Okay, so that's it. This time we've used the if, elif, elif. Okay, or if you want to just put an indentation here, it looks like this. It's like if, else if, else if. Okay, so let's try to have an output first. We can use a print, and then we can just simply use the variable there. For example, we have the output. Oh, I'm sorry, I just use because the semicolon is not required in Python. Okay, and then so aside from output, we have another input. Output here. For example, let's add some number. The for example, let's use the number. So number, comma, um, is what? Okay, you just have to put a string there, and then comma, then output. So it's like, let's say you've entered 5. 5 is negative. 5 is positive. Okay, another way, just for you to review, so we can use, for example, the or let's say yes, the number, what number? You can use a plus sign, right? The uh, number is, for example, is, and then output. Okay, I'm just showing you a different version of an output statement. This one using only the variable string. The other one using the comma separated version display that, let's say for example 5 is output, or 5 is positive. And then the other one is by using the print function, using the plus string concatenation operator. But this time, since number is an integer, and we need to cast this one to string, or convert the number temporarily to string. So we can do that by using the str. This one is required if you're using the plus sign here for string concatenation. Okay, just to make this whole statement string, or else you'll get an error. So let's try to run this one. Okay, so enter number one. Okay, so we have, for example, 5, and then enter. I'm sorry, we're running. Okay, you will often encounter this one. Okay, because we're running the previous one. So if you want to make sure that we are running the our desired file, so you just have to point on this tab, and then just click the run button here, and then that's it. Enter a number. For example, we have 5. So 5 is positive. So we can have positive by just displaying only the variable name, or by just displaying the number, and then we have a string, and then another output string. And then by using the string concatenation operator here. That's why we have the number 5 is positive. Let's try another example. If we, for example, we have negative 3. So negative 3 is negative, and the number negative 3 is negative. Okay. That's how simple it is. So I just want to show you that in this example, in example 2, by using the if, elif, and elif. Okay, now let's try to differentiate the use of if and then elif. Actually, this one, we can actually use another way. So let me just put this in a comment. Okay, I just have to put this in a comment. Okay. So another version is we can use this one, the if with an else. So for example, we have if a number is less than 0, okay, and then elif number. So instead of, since other than that, other than negative and 0, so the rest are positive. So we can simply use an else here. If you don't want to put any negative there, don't forget to just a colon there. Okay, and you can also still, this one will still work. Okay, for example, if the input is 5, so the output is still positive. Okay, so that's this one. You can use this one if you want to just put all the conditions. So the only advantage of this one compared to using only if, so in here, if the first condition is already true, Python will no longer test the remaining elif. Okay, the same thing with if, elif, else. If, for example, the first if condition already true, so this one will be disregarded, or will not be tested anymore. Unlike, let me show you the if version, okay, that we had a while ago. This can also be solved using only the if statements. Okay, so let me just copy this one, just put it here. Okay, and then instead of elif, so you just have to use a single if there. Okay, that's it. And then another if, for example, here, if number is greater than 0, it's positive. Okay, so if you're gonna put it in all in one line, for example, okay, every condition in one line. So same here, we have an else. Okay, we have an elif. Okay. So this one also still valid, but the execution time is a little bit slower compared to using if, elif, else, or if, elif version. Why? Because again, using if, Python will test all the 3 if condition, even if the first condition is already true. because by using an individual if, this has no relation to each other. Unlike in an if-elif or if-elif-else, okay, once the condition, or for example, if the first condition is false, so that's the only time that Python will test another elif. Okay, but if this condition is already true, so Python will no longer test the else, or the same with the second elif here. Okay, so these are the three versions. Let's try to run for you um, to see that this one is still applicable. Okay, with the different ways on how to solve this particular problem by using if-elif, by using the if-elif-else, or by using the individual if statements. Now let's try to write another program. Let's try to solve this another problem. Write a Python program to print the largest of three numbers input. Okay, so let's try to have, for example, number one is equal to int, and then we have a input. For example, enter number one. Okay, you just have to copy this times. Number one, we have number two, and then we have number three, and then enter number two, number three. Okay, if you have noticed that always put an input process output here, because that's the basic outline that I can teach you every time we solve some of the basic problems if you are a beginner. So you have to keep that in mind, okay, so that um, this one will guide you that okay, after you have finished the input statement, so of course the next step is to solve the problem. So that's what's inside of the process area. Okay, so how are we going to solve this a simple problem? Okay, how are we going to compare the numbers 1, 2, and 3? Okay, so for example, we will use the if-elif that we already learned in our previous example. So again, if, and then we have a number one, I'm sorry, number one, and then we will compare. So if number one is greater than number two and the number three, so therefore number one is the largest, right? So something like that. So that's the logic. So how are we going to do that in Python? So if number one is greater than number two, for example, if number one is greater than number two, and number one is greater than number three, so that's the time that we need to use the logical operator AND. So we have the AND, and we have an OR, and we have a NOT in using exclamation point here. Okay, this is just the usual that we use in other programming language, but in Python, instead of using the character, we will use the lowercase end here. Okay, that's for the logical end. So if number one again is greater than number two, and number one is greater than number three, okay, so that's it. And then you just have to put a colon there at the end, okay, or you can just simply put a space there, for example, if you want. That's still valid. And then what are the statements that you want to do if this condition is true? Again, if you're using the AND logical operator, the whole if statement or condition here is true if both of this condition, for example, if the number one is greater than number two, if this one is true and also the other one is true, so true and true, that's the only time that this condition will become true by using the logical AND. But if we're going to use the OR, meaning if only one, we just need at least one of this condition is true, so the result of this if condition is true. Unlike with AND, it should have both the condition must be true. Okay, so That's it. So I'll just bring back the end there to continue solving this problem. So if this condition is true, so what are we going to do? If number 1 is greater than number 2 and number 3, so we can say that, okay, the largest is number 1, right? So that's it. Or if you want, you can just simply put this one all in one line. Okay, something like that. See, it's very easy here in Python. Okay, so another. This time we just have to use elif. Okay, why? So that if the first condition is true, so again, Python will no longer test the other condition. Okay, so let's try. What if the number 2? If number 2 is greater than number 1 and number 2 is, I'm sorry, if number 2 here is greater than number 3, so largest is equal to number 2. And another elif number, let's talk about number 3. If number 3 is greater than number 1 and the number 3 is greater than number 2, so the largest is number 3. Okay, so that's it. That's how that's the process. And then let's try to use one output statement here. For example, okay, let's try to put another print here first. For numbers what? I just want to display all the numbers. For numbers, for example, number 1, comma, I just have to put a space here, okay, and then comma again, and then a number 2, and then another comma, and then a number 3. So for numbers number 1, number 2, number 3, okay, and then I'll just use another output here. The largest is, okay, comma, we put that inside of the largest variable. Okay, that's it. Input, process, and output. Let's try to run. So we have, for example, 5, 7. I'm sorry. Again, we're running the wrong file. So just have to put the point here, then click the run button. Okay, that's it. So 7, 9, and 5. For numbers 7, 9, 5, the largest is 9. Okay, so that's it. That's how simple it is on how to solve the largest of 3 numbers input. But this time with the highlight of using the logical and operator and the if-elif statements. Now, another example, what if we want to compare 2 strings? Okay, so like for example, if you are tasked to write a Python program to check if the user name and password inputs are valid. Okay, so I have here now the input statement. For example, enter username and enter a password. So we'll be using also an if-elif here. Okay, so for example, if what? If username is equal, so we will still use the double equal sign if you want to compare strings here in Python. Unlike in other programming language that there is another function that we use. Okay, so in here we simply use the double equal sign operator. So if username is equal, okay, so let's try this one is a valid. For example, if a username is equal to manager, okay, so that is the valid username. Okay, and then I will show you how to have an if else inside of the if. So we call this as a nested if else statements. Okay, so of course if username is equal to manager, so what are we going to do? We need to also make sure that if the password is also correct, right? So we can just put it another if here inside of the if. since we have the indentation here, so Python will recognize this, the second if, as a part of the first if. So it's like this one is the mother, and then this one is the child, or this one is the outer if, and this one is the inner if. Okay, so this time around, if the user have entered the correct username, which is manager, for example, so we will ask again if the user have entered the correct password. For example, so we will just put here the correct password also. Let's say 1234. Let's say 1234. So if username is equal to manager, then we have another if password is equal to 1234. So this method or way that I've used here is actually if you don't want to use the logical end operator. So you can use the method of having a nested if else statements here. Okay, so for example, if password is equal to 1234, so what are you going to do? Okay, so you have to print, for example, of course, if the username and passwords are both correct, so we can say that, okay, access uh, granted or valid, right? So that's it. And then, so what about if the user, yes, have entered the correct username but incorrect password? So that's the time that we will use, for example, here, the else. Okay, now else, we will align this in our if. Okay, so meaning that under if this condition is true, okay, so we will ask the user again either the password is correct or the or what are the other things there. So we will just simply put here if the password is not correct. Okay, for example, invalid password. Okay, so you can just put it here, or invalid password. That's it. And then, what about if the username is not correct? So we will use the um, elif. Elif, for example, if the username manager correct. So if the username is not correct, so we will ask for the password also, right? If password, okay, because if there is a possibility that the user have entered an invalid username, but the password is correct. So for example, if password is equal to what? To 1234. So if password is equal to 1234, so we will prompt the user that he or she entered an invalid username. Okay, so this is an example that this one is invalid username. Okay, but the password is correct, right? And then the last, what if invalid username and then also invalid password? This is the time that you provide another else there, even if you don't put any condition there. Okay, it's already, it's understood that Python will go in your else statement once the if and then the elif are still false. So print invalid username and password. Okay, there you go. So this is an example of a nested of an if else inside of an if. Okay, without using the logical and operator. Let's try to run. Are we running again? This one. Okay, enter username. For example, manager. Enter password. So 1234. Okay, so access granted. So meaning the if condition is true. So Python will no longer test the elif and the else. So what about if we have entered the correct username, for example, manager. So this one is true. Okay. And then for the password, we've entered 1324. Okay, which is incorrect. So the output is we're expecting an invalid password output there. Okay, so that's it. It's invalid password. Let's try another. What if the username is incorrect? For example, the user have entered the stuff, and then the password is correct, 1234. So you can say that, okay, that's invalid username, but the password is correct, right? And if the user have entered incorrect username and then invalid password, so that's the time that you can simply display invalid username and password. Okay, that's how simple it is to compare two strings and how to use the if-else is the if by using an if-elif-else, and also I've discussed on how to use the logical and operator, on how to we differentiate using only if statements, having if-elif-else, and then the if-elif-elif, and the conditional operators. So these are the source code for this episode. And that's all for today. And if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And as always, show your love through comments and favorites. God bless and thank you for watching.